In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys why it is so important to be using masking tools when editing your wildlife photos in Lightroom or Photoshop. Now recently Adobe added some very much needed improvements to their masking tools that you can use in Lightroom and really opened up so many new avenues and options for editing your wildlife photos. And when you use these tools properly, you can really take your photos to a level that simply isn't achievable with the universal sliders in Lightroom. For this video, I'm going to be editing a photo using only the universal sliders in Lightroom to show you how that comes out. And then I'm going to edit that same photo using only the masking tools in Lightroom and show you the difference between these two photos. And I think you're going to be really impressed with how much better using these masking tools can make your photos. So for the example photo for this video, I'm going to be using a photo that you guys have seen many times on the channel up to this point, and that is this great gray owl photo that I took last summer while working in Yellowstone. And as you can see here, this is just the raw file, nothing done to it, as is. I think I did actually already crop it in. Yeah, I did crop this one in. But basically this is a raw file, no edits, nothing done to it, just the file as is coming out of camera. And like I said, what I'm going to do first is use only the sliders to edit this photo. So first of all, I'm going to go in and I'm going to adjust my white balance here because I don't really like this white balance. Make it a little bit more warm there. And then I'm definitely going to bring down the tint because it is way too purple in this photo. So then I'm going to bring the exposure up a little bit because I do think that it needs to be brought up. And I think that's good right there. And at this point, I do think that the main thing that we need to do here is take down, you know, some of this background back here needs to be kind of crushed, and we need to brighten up the owl a little bit. So for this, the first thing I'm going to do is add contrast, which is going to bring out some of the whites in that owl and crush some of the background in these blacks back here a little more. And then I'm going to just kind of see what highlights do. I think bringing highlights up is going to make this a little better, just because you bring out the whites on the owl. Obviously, we're going to want some color in this photo, so I'm going to bring that up a little bit. And then with shadows, I think we want to go down just a touch, maybe not that much, but a little bit there. Whites, I don't really think I want to do anything with at all. I think they're pretty good as they are. Honestly, maybe go down a little bit with those. And then blacks, I think we're going to go somewhere right in here with just a little increase on the blacks. And overall, you know, as you can see here, you know, maybe you want to add some texture in there. Honestly, I don't think that this photo really needs that too much. But now we're going to go in and we're going to sharpen this. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to zoom in here on the owl's face, and you can see that definitely a little bit out of focus on this image, but we're going to try to bring that back in a little bit with sharpening. And you can see there that you're getting a little more detail, but it's also getting more grainy, so not totally ideal there. But overall, I think that this is going to be the finished photo for the sliders. There's really not too much more that you could do to this photo to improve it using only these sliders here. And you can see here that compared to where we started, this is definitely much better. However, I do have some problems. For one, I don't think the owl pops enough in this image. I think that, you know, he's a little bit too dark, and there's really no way to fix that with the sliders, because if you adjust, you know, your highlights to try to bring out the owl, then that also raises highlights in the grass and in the background as well. So that doesn't really work. Same thing if you try to adjust shadows or, you know, anything else in this photo. Using those sliders, you're not going to be able to really pull this owl out any more than I already have in this first initial edit. Not to mention that, you know, your background here is not as blurry as I would really like it to be, and that is because I was shooting all the way up at f8 for this image. And unfortunately, I couldn't go any lower than f8. I was shooting on a 100 to 400 f5.6 with a teleconverter, so that put me all the way out at f8. So there was no way for me to get more of that shallow depth of field out of this image while I was out shooting this image in the field. And this is kind of off topic, but this is a problem that you will see in many of my images from last summer, including these bear photos here, which, speaking of bears, if you guys would like to photograph bears, I'm actually going to be giving away a free trip to Lake Clark National Park to photograph coastal Alaskan brown bears when I hit 10,000 subscribers. Your flights, food, all of your travels on this trip will be paid for. All you have to do for a chance to enter is to be a subscriber to the channel. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button down below, and then when I hit 10K, let's go to Alaska. But in the meantime, let's get back to editing the photo here. And as you can see, I've got the settings all reset now, and we're now going to do our edit using only the masking tools that Lightroom offers. So getting into it, the first thing you're going to want to do with this photo is, again, adjust your white balance. And technically for this, I would typically just do that universal because I'm going to want the exact same white balance throughout the whole image. But because I said I'm using masking tools for the whole thing, you know what? I'll go ahead and just turn this into a linear gradient, and we'll go ahead and just adjust these. So we've got that adjusted as needed. And for this photo, I'm actually not going to do anything to the background yet because, as I said in our last edit, I really wanted the owl to be a little bit brighter in that image and stand out a little bit more. And for this image, which started out underexposed, I'm just going to allow it to stay underexposed in the background, and I'm just going to brighten up the owl. And this is the beauty of masking. What I can do is I can go in here and click on our masking tools to open up this tab. I can click up here to add a new one, and you can see I've got select subject, select sky, brush, linear gradient, all this stuff here. And for this, I'm going to do select subject and see if it can pick out the owl in this image so that I can make edits to that part of the photo. And as you can see here, we now have the owl highlighted and the perch that he's on here. It didn't do a perfect job because it also grabbed this stick here. But that's going to be okay for this image, and we're going to go ahead and just brighten that owl up a little bit and bring him out in the photo. That may be a little too much, something like that there. And I'm going to increase the contrast of this owl just like that. So that already made the owl pop a little bit more, but I also want to make sure that I'm getting more detail in the owl, because as you remember last time, it was a little bit soft in the face. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to increase the texture here, and then I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit because I think that this is a little bit too bright, and I want to just have that down. Even though overall I want the exposure up, I want to have the highlights down a little. And you can see there that by masking just the subject, that has allowed me to make edits only to the owl, only to adjust that part of the photo, and has really helped it to stand out in this frame a lot more than it was in the previous edit. And to emphasize that even further, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to add a radial gradient here, and I'm going to put this around the owl, and you can see that it's, the red is where the adjustments will take place and where they'll affect. And basically this is a radial gradient coming out from this dot that kind of radiates out and gets weaker as it expands. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to press on the invert right here so that it's around the owl, and the owl is in the area that's not affected, all around it is. And I'm going to darken the image just a little bit like that there. Just helps the owl stand out a little more. And then the main thing I want to do here is bring down the texture and the clarity. That way, I'm crushing that background a little bit more and making it a little bit more blurry. I'm also going to go in and add a little bit of negative dehaze, which helps to flatten that background, and then bring down the exposure even more right there. But I think still overall here, I would like to have a little bit of a brighter image. So I'm going to go into this first mask that covered the whole thing, and I'm going to brighten it up just a little bit like that right there. And then I'm also going to go ahead and adjust my saturation because I do want a little more color in this photo. So I think that's looking better there. So with that, I'm really liking how this image looks so far, and it's definitely a lot better than our first edit, but I still don't think that it is perfect yet. So I'm going to go in now and I'm going to add yet another gradient, and this is going to be this linear gradient that you can see right here. Basically what I'm going to try to do is darken this grass and take some of the detail out of it to make sure that your focus kind of stays up here on the owl, because the human eye is trained to go towards the sharpest part of the photo and the brightest part of the photo. So you want your main subject to always be the sharpest and the brightest part of the frame. That's really kind of a rule of thumb for photography. Obviously, it doesn't always apply, but generally that's your best option. That's basically what I'm trying to do with these different masking tools here. But I'm still not totally happy with the look of the owl, so I'm going to go in yet again. And I'm going to add a radial gradient this time instead of a subject select, because I don't want to also affect the perch that he's on and all that, which was present with the select subject mask. As you can see here, I was affecting the stick and all that too. So for this, I'm only going to affect the owl and the little bit of area around it there. I'm going to bring up the exposure even more on this owl, and then I'm going to bring up contrast and pull down highlights. And you can see now with that adjustment, this owl is really starting to pop in this image and stand out so much more than the owl did with the universal sliders edit. And for one of the last few things that I'm going to do here, I'm going to zoom in on his face, and I'm going to use this brush to select just his eyes and his beak. So that I can brighten those up a little bit. And I don't really like the feather on this, so I'm going to bring that down, which basically means it's going to have less of a gradual flow coming out from the mask and have a little bit of a harder edge. So yeah, a little bit less feather so that I can select his eyes a little bit more easily, and then go down here on the beak. And now all of that is selected. And basically here, as minor as it might seem, what I'm going to do is bring up the exposure a little bit, bring up the contrast. Honestly, that might be too much on exposure. Bring up our saturation to bring out those yellows. And we go ahead and zoom out. Boom, the eyes pop so much more than they did before when you didn't have that edit right there. Just a very minor thing there, but by brightening up those eyes and that beak and adding a little bit more yellow, they really pop so much more. So I'm pretty happy with where this is at right now, but I'm still not totally happy. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to add yet another radial gradient, but this one is going to be just over the face here, because as I said earlier, you want the subject to be the brightest and the sharpest part of the photo. And the owl is obviously the main subject, but you want even further than that, the main part of that subject, which is going to be the face in this case. So for this, I'm going to add a little bit more clarity. I'm going to bring it up a little bit in brightness there, in exposure, and then I'm going to go in and add just a little bit of warmth. You can see when I close this down that has just added a little bit more detail to that face, brightened it up a little, and really just pulled your eye in just a tiny bit more towards the face of the animal, which is obviously the main focus and what you want the viewer's eye to go to. And I think with that, we have finished this edit of the photo. And just taking a look back at that first edit, you can see that here. And then now here is the new edit using the masking tools only. I don't know about you guys, but in my opinion, the new edit using the masking tools is just so much better than the original one using the universal sliders. And the main key takeaway here, the big difference between these two styles of editing, using the sliders versus using the masking tools, is that with the sliders, you're editing globally. You're editing the entire image as opposed to just tiny parts of it. So there's really no way you can select for just, you know, the owl or the background or the foreground or whatever it is and just adjust that. But when you're using the masking tools, you're editing locally. You're editing each part of the image separately to achieve the look that you want each component to have. And by doing that, you're creating a much more powerful image. By using the masking tools and adding layers and layers to your image, you're giving yourself so much more creative freedom over what you're able to do with your photos and creating a much more accurate and better representation of that perfect image that you've envisioned in your head, because you're adjusting and tweaking each small part of the image to perfectly fit your wants that you have for the photo. So guys, I hope this video has helped you to understand why I believe that using the masking tools in Lightroom is a much better way to edit your photos. I should disclose that, you know, I didn't go all the way in depth with this. This was very basic edits, both obviously with the sliders and even with the masks. If you look at the image that we created here using the masking tools versus my finished version of this exact same file, which was also using the masking tools, you can see that it is vastly different. This one is definitely a lot more heavily edited and was really pushed using those masking tools to fit my personal taste for images. But I basically wanted to give you guys the basics and really hammer home that message of locally versus globally and why editing locally is so much better than globally. So with that guys, before I close this out, I want to remind you guys to subscribe for that 10,000 subscriber Alaska Lake Clark Bear photography trip giveaway. That's a mouthful. Also, drop a comment down below and a like as well. That really helps the channel out and I would really appreciate it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and I will see you all in the next one.